Good afternoon, ladies.
Good afternoon, Natalie.
Hi. Could I just ask you, please, to again put your student number in the chat, because that will go towards the administration of this class. Thank you. So this evening we are going to talk about the issue of perception. And I think perception is going to be an easy subject for you to understand, simply because in the last couple of weeks we have been talking about what are the influences of behavior. And I think perception is one of those elements that just cements what are the different variables at play when it comes to human behavior. So today we're going to take a deep dive into chapter 6, and we are going to talk about perception. And hopefully at the end of the session, you would have a much better idea in terms of your own behavior, as well as the behaviors of others, and the perceptions and how it is formed and how it again informs our behavior and the behavior of others. So that is the topic for tonight. Lauren and... Yeah, so Lauren, if you could just please put your student number in the chat, because that is towards the administration of attendance. No attendance registers need to be completed. This will serve as the attendance register. So I am going to share my screen with you at this point. Just checking, can you all see my screen?
Yes, Natalie, we can.
Thank you. So let's fall into it. While our sensory receptors are constantly collecting information from the environment, it is ultimately how we interpret that information that affects how we interact with the world. So we have 5 senses. That's the sense of taste, touch, smell, hearing, and sight. And we take in these stimuli from these receptors, and we try and make sense and interpret and organize that sensory input that we are getting, because that affects how we interact with the world. It affects the decisions we made. It affects how we think, not just about ourselves, but also about other people. And it is interesting that this chapter really tells us what are those aspects that are in play that forms perception at the end of the day. So as a definition, perception refers to the way sensory information is organized, interpreted, and consciously experienced. And I think that is a very simple way of looking at perception. So again, it is how we and what we taste, touch, smell, hear, and see, how we then take that stimuli and organize that information that we have received, interpret that information, and then obviously it influences what we do with that type of information. It forms ideas about people, it forms impressions about people and ourselves. People's perception is affected by internal factors such as personal experiences, personality, and external factors such as stimuli from the external environment and context in which they operate. So perception is not something in isolation. And that is why you will find that you have two people looking at the same situation but interpreting it differently, because those personal experiences, your personality, your specific external factors are unique to you. So that is why we look at the same thing, but we interpret as wide as the ocean, many permutations about what we see and what we understand, and what we therefore becomes our mental model. And psychologists usually differentiate between sensation, and this is where you are receiving new or raw data, and stimulation of the sense organs, again, sight, see, hear, feel, taste. Whereas they see perception, and I think this differentiation is important. Perception is the active process of selection, organization, and interpretation, or giving meaning to sensory stimulation. So yes, sensation is that sensory stimulation that you get through your five senses. Perception is taking all of that data together with your personal experiences, external factors, taking that, organizing it, interpreting, and giving meaning to it. In the work context, effective sensory awareness and perception are essential for observing, interpreting, and giving meaning to work instructions, working conditions, tasks, and co-workers. Because as a line manager, it is important that you understand how these things operate in the workplace and what strategies you need to use effectively in your attempts at managing people, in your attempts at doing job assignments, in your attempt to involve people in projects and special delivery items. And the nature of the perceptual processes and psychophysics, when we look at the perceptual process, this involves being aware or conscious of ourselves, of others, our environment, and the world at large, and giving meaning to awareness. And psychophysics involves the study and meaning of these processes. But I think what you just need to remember in terms of what we just said is you experience the world through your five senses. You organize that information, you internalize that information together with your own context in terms of internal and external factors, and you use that to create meaning. Let's look at and perception. So through your senses, you are made aware of what is happening inside and outside the body. And these could be things like it is hot, or it is cold, or I hear a phone ringing, or I don't hear a phone ringing. Sensation starts when people become aware of or obtain information about themselves and their environment through sense receptors in the five human senses and internal body tissues. Perception is the cognitive process which happens in the human body and mind to select, analyze, organize, interpret, and understand sensory stimuli and impressions from environments. Again, it's a different way of saying exactly the same thing. And through perception, through this process, we search for the best interpretation of data that is readily available. And thus requires more than just stimulus patterns. Because during interpretation, we assess or evaluate the data or form a particular understanding of the data. And our interpretations are based on our mental models or frames of reference. Past experience play an important role in how we interpret data, as well as our assumptions about human nature and our expectations about people, things, and events. We may have assumptions about people or just about human nature as being either good or either bad. So that's the assumption you have about people. People are all bad. And when you receive these sensory data, in that processing with the mental model of people are bad, that is going to obviously create a perception that is your truth. It might not be the truth, because we as humans become then very selective in terms of what we do notice and the things that we don't notice in the process. Now, most sensory abilities of awareness and perceptual processes are more or less similar for all people. However, it was found that genetic and biological and psychological difference in people may make perceptual processes selective and very unique for each individual. And I think the other thing we spoke a lot about, nature versus nurture. Considerable evidence substantiates that the key aspect of perception are learned. So we learn to form these things because of our history, our past, things that we've experienced, things that's going on in the environment at the moment. So in this chapter, it talks about thresholds, and this is thresholds as it relates to those 5 sensory detectors. And here it says the lowest level at which a stimulus can be detected 50% of the time. So half the time is called a threshold in psychological terms. Under ideal conditions, a person's ability to detect weak stimuli is better than expected. However, disturbances from the environment, such as noise or poor light, influence people's perceptual thresholds. So there's also a term that's called the just noticeable difference, which refers to the smallest difference. Something can be changed in order for the difference to be noticeable, detectable, at least half of the time. So when we are in a shopping center and my cell phone is in my handbag and my cell phone rings while I'm in the shop with my daughter looking at buying clothes, as an example. Why is it that I might not be hearing that phone ring, whereas she hears that phone rings? So obviously our thresholds are very different in terms of when our senses become aware that a phone is ringing. Be that it's a hearing issue, be that it is a threshold issue, but that is how we need to look at this. It is the smallest difference, by which something needs to be changed in order for the difference to be noticeable. So in order for me to hear my phone ring, at least 50% of the time, that would be the just noticeable difference. And as an example, this is a very good example of the just noticeable difference, because it uses Apple, and it indicates, by how much does Apple need to drop the price of their iPads for people to recognize it as a bargain. So sometimes companies would advertise sale. They would even advertise things like Black Friday or Cyber Monday, but the discount would be something like 20%. Now, that to me is not a Black Friday sale. That is a normal sale. So if you want to make me think that I am picking up a bargain, you might buy 50% off or 75% off, where I really perceive that to be a bargain in terms of, let's call it back to the example of an iPad. The same for when a brewery changes the labels on their beer. It could be that customers will experience that as something foreign. This is not the beer that I like and love and normally buy, and they get quite disturbed or confused in terms of what they are seeing, because they're expecting to see something and then it's completely something different. But in this scenario, the marketing campaign that sits behind this change could be a branding change, the logo is being changed. It could be that the company direction is changing, but they're not changing the beer labels. And that would be the assurance that your advertising campaigns would give to your clients, to say the label has changed, but the content is still exactly the same. Then there's a concept called signal detection. And again, it is about when do you become aware of a stimulus or factors in the environment around you that can be detected through the 5 senses. How do we notice these stimuli? Why do we sometimes not notice them? And why do we detect them when they're not really there? So sometimes I think, didn't I just hear my phone ring? Only to get to the phone and realize, no, the phone was not ringing. And the leading explanation of signal detection theory at its most basic states that the detection of a stimulus depends on both the intensity of the stimulus and the physical, psychological state of the individual. Basically, we notice things based on how strong they are and on how much we're paying attention. Subliminal perception. I think this is probably an area that you would be most familiar with. Perception of or a reaction to a stimulus that occurs without awareness or consciousness. So there was an experiment done in a movie theater where it had flashed on all the TVs in the area that popcorn sales and Coke sales, popcorn, buy Coke, buy popcorn, buy Coke. But it was at such a subliminal level that it was just a flash for a few seconds and it was gone. So you being in that food court environment, you can't really recall that you advert for buying Coke or buying popcorn. But they then found that through the subliminal stimuli that they sent out, the sale for Coke has gone up and the sale for popcorn has gone up when they play these quick 20-second ads in the food hall. So it just shows you how that subliminal perception and how that is formed, and how marketing companies can so easily persuade you into reacting to a marketing campaign, because it's not actually that you need to buy it, but the suggestion that is made in the ad starts to manifest in active behavior. And that is achieved through subliminal perception. You come into a store like Zara, for instance, and you immediately smell perfume. Because when you walk into that environment, they want to make you feel very special, very exclusive, because the fragrance that you smell around you is aspirational for yourself. And the effect of that is that you may stay longer in the store, and you may actually buy something before you walk out of the store. And those are all subliminal things that marketers does to get us to action. And in this case, the action is to buy. Let's look at sensory adaptation. This refers to a reduction in sensitivity to a stimulus after constant exposure to it. So you see it too much. While sensory adaptation reduces our awareness of a constant stimuli, it helps free up our attention and resources to attend to other stimuli in the environment around us. And some of these are, you know, when you know a route that you're driving all the time, you know that there is a stop street coming up, you know that there is maybe a pedestrian crossing coming up, and it becomes so automatic in how you respond to those things that your attention would be less on that, and your focus would be more enhanced on things that is a little bit unique in the environment. Visual perception. Can you tell me which line is longer, A or B?
A. Seems like it.
Both lines are the same size.
Hundreds. Because the only thing that happens in A is that thing is inverted. That arrow thingy is inverted. And in B, it is, what is the opposite of inverted? It is to the outside. But the length of the actual line is the same. And this is what is referred to as visual perception. B does look longer than A, but when you really drill down to it and look at the components, it is the same size from a line perspective. Now, visual perception is the ability to see, organize, interpret your environment. And in this example of the lines, your eyes took in the lines as well as the points on the ends of the line. And when you do that, when you just look at that at first glance, of course, B is longer than A, you know, but when you really look with attention, you see, actually, you know, the lines are the same. So at the same time, your brain was organizing and making sense of the image. This is a very important process because it gives us the ability to learn new information. So the next time you see something like that, you would already have experience of seeing something similar before. So you will look at it in a different way than just the obvious, B is longer than A. And without visual perception, you would not be able to make sense of the words on a page, recognize common objects, or have the eye-hand coordination required for many daily tasks. Because I think many will agree with me when I say that when you read something, whether it's a book or a report or whatever, you kind of read through word recognition and not by spelling each word out. And I think this is what is meant. So if you look at this photo, what do you see?
Like 2 Mexicans, one playing the guitar, and then also an old woman and an old man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? This photo is actually showing you the picture of a vase. Did you see the vase?
I can see it now that you're mentioning it.
This one you all should have done already. What are you seeing here with the second picture?
It's the young woman with the side profile face, and then the older woman with the feather in her hair.
100%. And the various features that you ascribe to either when you're looking at the old woman or whether you're looking at the young woman and you see her chin bone being the side of her face, and in the old woman it's the nose, etc., etc. But different people might look at this image and see totally different pictures. Some might just see the young girl. Some might just see the old person. And it explains, those stimuli that we take in through our senses and how we organize that because of our social context, our mental models, etc. What do you see in this one? This one is called Rubens vase. And if you focus on the white area, you will see the vase. If you focus on the black area, you see two profiles of people face to face. Again, different people would look at it differently. I think on social media, a long time ago, there was this picture of a dress, and people will ask the question, what color is this dress? Some people would say the dress is blue. Some would say the dress is black. But it's the same picture. How is it that you are experiencing, visualizing this, perceiving this as either black or either blue? And that's the interesting thing about perception. Depth and distance perception. Perceptual processes function in the three-dimensional organization of stimuli as well as in distance judgment. The process includes use of both monocular and binocular cues. Now, I don't know why they make it so difficult. Monocular is just through one eye. It's when you go to the office of the ophthalmologist and he says, close the one eye and now read this line far in the distance that you can see. And binocular is just when you use both eyes, like through a binoculars. But it is important that we understand the depth and distance perception and how that works. Size consistency. It means that an object seems to stay the same size despite changes in the distance between the viewer and the object. So the example here is whether a bus, let's say a school bus, is close to you, 2 blocks away from you, or 2 kilometers away. The viewer will still perceive the bus as a large object. So the size of the bus is not influenced by distance. You still perceive that bus the size that it actually is. Shape constancy means that an object seems to stay the same shape despite changes in its orientation towards the viewer. Example, if you look at a CD, when you look at it from a side angle, you will still see a CD as being round and not oval. So the orientation to the viewer is what is at play here. Lightness and color constancy is where an object seems to stay the same lightness and color despite changes in the amount and color of light falling on it. As an example, a pair of black shoes will still look like a pair of black shoes, whether it is in bright daylight or it is in artificial light. So light does not influence the color constancy. Let's look at illusions. An optical illusion involves a discrepancy between the appearance of a visual stimulus and its physical reality. Example, where one perceives images that are not really there, such as the shimmering water one often seems to see on a dry road ahead, especially when it is hot. So it is a bit of an optical illusion. There's no water on the road, but the heat waves makes it appear as if there's water on the road. And I think optical illusion is also what magicians use when they do their sleight of hand tricks. Now, what are the factors that influences perception? So one of the factors is the perceiver. The expression of beauty is in the eye of the beholder suggests that perception is subjective. It is from your point of view. Subjective factors include the attitudes of the perceiver, the motives, interests, prejudices, preferences, past experiences, and expectations. And these are all the things from a perceiver point of view that influences perception. The perceived object's characteristics. So characteristics in the object being observed can affect what is being perceived. For example, rowdy people are more likely to be noticed in a group than quiet ones. The situation and culture as an influencer of perception. Perception are seldom interpreted without consideration of the context in which the stimulus occurs. For an example, somebody who's just come out of a relationship is more likely to only notice happy couples passing by because that is their context at the moment. Perception happens within a context. So all this person would see is happy couples and feeling sorry for themselves because they've just come out of a relationship and it is something that they yearn for. The time at which an object or event is observed can influence attention and therefore perception. Interpersonal perception. And sometimes I really think that when we meet new people for the first time, you either have I think this person and I could really become friends, or you have a neutral stance. It's neither here nor there. Or you have just an instant aversion to this person. You just don't like this person. And it is interesting to see what are those things in our makeup that makes us form those perceptions of, oh, you look like somebody that I could be friends with. Oh, you look like somebody that I don't want to get close to, as an example. Interpersonal perception. And person perception is a bit more complex for at least the following 3 reasons. Firstly, you would try to perceive qualities that cannot be observed directly. You have to infer them from other people's appearances and behavior. Secondly, you assess what the person's motives and intentions might be. Thirdly, you know that individuals can try to manipulate your impressions of them and even deceive you. And I think it is what I described earlier in terms of mental models and your person perception, how that will be influenced. Impression formation. What is at play when we form impressions of people? Now, the first one there is schemas. A schema is a generalized idea about a frequently encountered object, event, or person. People are labeled and categorized such as social climbers, materialists, individualists, or feminists. A second type of schema is one's self-schema, a cognitive framework of the way one thinks about oneself, such as being ambitious or motivated. A third type of schema is event schemas or scripts, and are generalized expectations about how one or other people should behave in particular situations, and the sequence in which the behavior should occur. For instance, protocol at formal official gatherings. That is the formation of impressions. Let's look at the primary effect. The tendency for early information to be considered more important than later information. During interpersonal perception, one tends to focus on attributes that are immediately apparent, such as talkativeness, grooming, gender, and general appearance. And this is probably the point where first impressions count. But first impressions are based on what? Talkativeness, grooming, gender, general appearance. I mean, what do you really base that on? And that type of thinking is what prevents you from paying close attention to information acquired later about a person. So you then have almost a mental block in terms of your first impression of somebody. And that first impression most often prevails through the lifespan of your relationship with that person, because you simply ignore, other information that is given from the person because you got stuck at that first impression. The Pygmalion effect is a very interesting concept because it is a form of self-fulfilling prophecy, which explains how perception and expectations tend to affect performance. So when you are a line manager and you have a team working for you on different aspects, so the key result areas are completely different from one person to the other person. But the way that you engage at an employee level, when tasks are given, or you talk about what is coming up in the next week and what needs to be delivered, if you're a manager that uses the Pygmalion effect, you would be telling your people, I know you can do this. I've got full trust in your ability. This is the project. You can use your own initiative in how you structure this, but I need to have it submitted as a first draft by Friday, as an example. Now, the Pygmalion effect says that most people will rise up to the expectation that you hold of them. If your expectation of that individual is, no, they're going to cope, I know they have the ability, they have the necessary skill to do it, they might not have done it before, but I have full confidence that they can deliver this piece of work, then you have used the Pygmalion effect. Now, also imagine that the opposite of that is also true. So if you hold an expectation of a person that says they will never be able to become anything in their life, they will never be able to deliver quality work at the standard that I require, again, people will rise up to the occasion and give you exactly what you have expected of them to do. So I think the lesson in that is, your self-fulfilling prophecy can either help you in your delivery, so in your relationship and how you deal with people, and it could be helpful, positive, or the opposite will also be true. And this is really this last sentence. That is why a supervisor's initial treatment of employees based on high expectations may influence the employees to live up to these expectations. Effects of physical appearance. People's judgment of other people's personalities are often influenced by their appearance, especially their physical attractiveness. One tends to ascribe desirable personality characteristics to people who are good-looking and to perceive them as more sociable, friendly, poised, warm, and well-adjusted than those who are less attractive. I have a very good story here. We have a friend, and one Saturday morning went into the car dealership to go buy a new car, because part of the new job that he was just appointed in was that he could spend X amount on a new car. Company pays for it. So he's just worked in his garden, and his knees were a little bit full of sand. He had sloffies on. his feet and a shorts and a t-shirt because he was just working in the garden prior to going to the dealership. He walks into the one brand, and this was the brand that he really, really wanted. And he walked in and he says to the salesperson, I'm here to buy this car. And the salesperson looked at him and said to him, you know that car cost X amount, right? And he said to the guy, I didn't ask you how much the car cost. I said, I'm here to buy this car. And he left that car dealership and he went to a different brand, walked in, had the opposite experience when saying, I'm here to buy that car. The salesperson said, sir, let's go to my desk. Let's start looking at what are the specs you are looking for, what are the color you're looking for, and how we can price this for you. Needless to say, he bought the second car. And that could be the effects of physical appearance and how people form perceptions, whether rightly or wrongly so. But we need to know what are those factors that are at play. Stereotypes. This is wildly held beliefs that people have certain characteristics because of their membership of a particular group. And these groups could be a myriad of groups. It could be members of a motorcycling group. Is there a stereotype that pertains to them in current culture? Of course. You know, members of a particular race group, members of a particular church group. And so the list goes on and on and on. So a stereotype is those widely held beliefs that people have certain characteristics because of their membership of a particular group. So you don't go into each individual member, you say as a whole, everybody who are motorcyclists are sons of anarchy, as an example. The halo effect. When we draw general impressions about people based on a single characteristic, such as intelligence or appearance, thus someone may be considered intelligent simply because they speak well, whilst their social or arithmetic inadequacies are not taken into consideration. That is when you single out a particular characteristic in the absence of looking at anything else. So I only want to see intelligence, and now I don't even consider anything else. Halo effect. Contrast effect. This can also distort perceptions because one does not evaluate somebody in isolation. One's reaction to a person is often influenced by other people one has recently encountered. This is especially true in an interview situation where a candidate may receive a more favorable evaluation if he or she is preceded by mediocre applicants rather than by strong applicants. So there's a mediocre applicant that came in, and your next applicant will then be assessed in relation more favorably because the bar was set low. Projection involves attributing your own feelings, thoughts, or motives to the other people, to the other person. The in-group and out-group dynamic. So the in-group, that would refer to a group that the person identifies themselves as being a member. And the out-group is the reverse of that. You don't see yourself as a member of that group. And out-group members are not only seen as being different from in-group members, but also seen as being more similar to each other and more interchangeable with each other than the in-group. In the in-group, we think, oh, we all look so different. We're not the same. We are individuals. Whereas when you look at an out-group, you would think, oh, those people all look the same. There's no identifiable differences amongst the members of that group. As some people think that they and members of their race look unique, but members of another race all look the same. It's like saying, oh, you can't discriminate, between Asian people. They all look alike, as an example. Because that would be an example of this aspect of intergroup bias. If you're in the in-group, you are better, you are unique, you are individuals, and everything is great. But if you think of somebody as not being part of your in-group and therefore an out-group, then you have these generalized notions. It's either all bikers are criminals, as an example. They all look alike, and we all know they don't. But because they all have leathers and denims on, they might, be perceived to be all alike.
Natalie?
Yes.
Sorry, just a question. What does Natalie think is the difference between the in-group and the stereotypes then?
It's very similar, hey? It's very similar.
Okay.
It is very similar. It's a good point that you're picking up. And I think we are going to look a little bit more at stereotypes in a little while, probably 1 or 2 pages on.
Yes, thank you.
But it is very much the same. That same, because you are stereotyping that out group. And the point of that is that you don't regard yourself as being like that. And it's easy to stereotype, people that are not like us, people that are not similar to what we do and be.
Thank you, Natalie.
Okay. Selectivity in person perception. When judging other people, one tends to do so selectively, according to one's own schemas, interests, background, experience, attitude, and even bias. Selective perception allows one to speed read others, but one runs the risk of forming inaccurate impressions and confirming one's negative expectation of others. Because people often see what they want to see, they can draw unwarranted conclusions from an ambiguous situation. And that's again that, first impressions thing. And everything happens at a heightened speed, whether it is interaction with people, whether it is delivering a report or a project or something like that. Everything goes at high speed these days. And we should probably have a thinking of giving people second chances, because your speed read of them the first time you had an interaction might have missed certain very important things. So now you've formed a perception, and I think we should always be open-minded for our perceptions to be amended as new information becomes available. We see new things. We see new aspects of somebody's personality, as an example, or they reveal more to you in their interaction with you or their interaction with others. So your speed read gets enriched. And in that enrichment, you know, your initial perception can be swayed. Attribution, the process of developing explanations or assigning perceived causes for events. I attribute this to the fact that he did the following. Attribution theory assists in understanding how people perceive the causes of events, determine responsibility for outcomes, and evaluate the personal qualities of the persons involved. Because we might look at the same event and come out of that with different perceptions. So, perception in prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice involves negative perceptions which influence attitudes held towards members of a group. Prejudice is a state of mind, feeling, or behavior that involves some scorn for others based on the group they belong to, their social class, their gender, sexual orientation, age, political orientation, race, or ethnicity. Prejudice is an attitude that is learned and serves a number of functions for the people who hold them, such as providing feelings of superiority and power. Because isn't that what prejudice is at its purest form? Prejudice further is a rigid and irrational generalization about a category of people. They tend to be inflexible attitudes supported by little or no direct evidence. Discrimination. So we've seen what is prejudice. Discrimination is when people behave differently, usually unfairly towards members of a group. And I think, like Kim said earlier, you know, because that would be the outgroup. The development of prejudice. How is it cemented? It is argued that people categorize themselves and others as belonging to particular social categories based on relevant characteristics. People often view their own group positively when compared to other groups, which leads to a tendency to favor in-group members more than out-group members. What is the influence of perception in the formation of prejudicial and discriminatory attitudes? People's perceptions, which are manifested in their attitudes, and remember, attitudes are subjective or collective, have a direct influence on the activities associated with prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination. The xenophobic attacks that sometimes occur here in South Africa are an example of how the categorization of people can be followed by discrimination and violence. And I think nothing explains it better than that. Reducing prejudice and discrimination. The main source of prejudice, drum roll please, is parental education. Prejudices learned at home, however, are further reinforced by the mass media and society in general. So it is learned in the parental home, it is reinforced through mass media and society in general, and therefore it is strengthened. Approaches that have attempted to teach people about other groups in the hope that more information will lead to greater understanding and acceptance have been notably unsuccessful. How many of you have attended a diversity workshop in your workplace? You know, why did they run those workshops? It is exactly for this reason of discrimination in the workplace. And the only way that you can eradicate discrimination in the workplace is to force people into situations where they have to learn about each other's cultures, ways of doing, etc. And in an organizational setting, you know, formal training can reduce stereotypes if it is done well, but it has found to have very little impact on actually turning that ship completely around. I think the problem in organizations is that they offer these workshops one time. You feel like you've learned in the session and you go back into an environment that maybe has not done that workshop, and then you just get assimilated back into the way things were before, unless you actually as an individual reach out to other groups or make yourself open to learn about other people's traditions and cultures and the ways of being. You know, unless you do that, mental model that you have of him, that prejudice that you carry, and the lens of discrimination that you look through to the outgroup is never going to change. And why companies are doing this training, it is the belief that if people are trained to negate stereotypes, it may result in reduced activation of stereotypes. But the point I wanted to make earlier is that this cannot just be a once-off, one-time event. You kind of need to force that connection and force that exposure a few times so that people can just get over that habit, because if you know more, you can do better. Group members who see themselves as part of an organization working for the same employer, pursuing the organization's vision and mission, and competing against others in the industry, further will be more likely to perceive their diverse group as an in-group working towards the same goal. But we also know that there are people who at work could be part of that, see themselves and their other colleagues from diverse backgrounds as an in-group. But when they go home, when they go back into their social setting, they then become an out-group again. So people almost have two personas. And one persona is because I must work and deal with people at work, and at home, I make different choices because I'm not forced to. Intergroup contact maintains that the most effective way to reduce prejudice and discrimination is through contact between groups. Does legislation help? I'm sorry, I'm just seeing something here. No worries. Some experts believe that the increases in higher education and democratization globally produce new types of nations in which cultural diversity is regarded as a source of national strength and wherein societies become more inclusive. So yes, it is written in legislation. Does that mean it translates into how people perceive others who are different from them? Therein lies the question. The world culture appears to be a double-edged sword in terms of tolerance. It promotes the acceptance of some forms of diversity, but legitimates the rejection of many others. 6 main patterns of tolerances or intolerances based on the World Value Survey include changes in racial and ethnic intolerance, shifts in religious tolerance towards Muslims and Jews, shifts in patterns of intolerance for homosexuals and people with HIV and AIDS. I remember a time in this country where people didn't want to say they have HIV AIDS. And now it is seen as a chronic disease, no different than diabetes and hypertension, etc. And I think HIV/AIDS has actually made more strides than TB, as an example. Changes in tolerance for lifestyle deviants, including alcoholics, the mentally ill, or those with criminal records. Previously, people that had mental illness, there was such a stigma attached to it that people didn't talk about the mental struggles that they were having or the diagnosis that they had. It was a secret, it was not talked about, it was hidden from everybody, whereas now people are very openly talking about that because that is actually part of the healing process of that mental health issue that they are dealing with. I mean, there are so many work programs generated for people that come out of prison, trying to further foster that rehabilitation impact. Alcoholism is also seen as a disease, and it's not just seen as people drinking too much, but there's a disease pathology that sits behind that. Changes in tolerance for drug addicts, changes in the tolerance for right and left-wing political radicals. And I think Trump showed us all how that can work to your advantage. Diversity and inclusion should be encouraged in organizations globally, particularly because the world population is becoming increasingly diverse. Now, some of you might be working for a national business, okay, or a local business. Some of you might be working for parastatal. Some of you might be working for international companies, where on a daily basis you are having telecoms with people in Dubai, with people in Russia, with people all over the world, in India for that matter. And diversity and inclusion in the South African context is pretty much around the normal things about race and religion and sexuality and those kind of things. But when you start talking about diversity and inclusion as a global citizen, you know, you're talking about languages, you're talking about not just South African culture, but also cultures of those countries with whom your company does business with. And what are those rituals and practices that are practiced? The current and future workforce in many nations is changing greatly because of changes in birth and mortality rates, immigration, age distribution, advances in healthcare, external pressures, and competition. Within each region, however, there are various unique issues and concerns which are based on its historical, cultural, religious, and other differences, which may impact on the extent to which diversity is addressed and valued. Like the whole issue of homosexuality in African countries, as an example, where they are not able to live openly as homosexual males, as an example. Governments in many countries have implemented legislation prohibiting discrimination against disadvantaged groups and encouraging their employment. And like I said earlier, it's good and well for there to be legislation. But if recruiters, if employers continue to only employ people that are similar like them, then we're still having a problem. But it's a positive step if legislation comes to the party. Perception and technology. People need more than basic reading and mathematics skill to function effectively in the current work environment. Technology is used in many organizational processes and interactions, and this changes many aspects of organizational behavior. People's perception, however, also impacts on their acceptance of technology in the workplace. At the moment, in the company I worked for, an insurance company, they are introducing a new system. So there's a move away from Oracle, and there's now a new implementation of Workday. And in the system implementation, the way of work has also drastically changed. Where you used to have a human resource function that dealt with administration, that administration has now been placed in the hands of the line manager. So where a recruiter would have done a couple of transactions to move a vacancy forward, that has now changed with this technology installation, that the line manager needs to advance that whole recruitment process until appointment, until the offer is made, until the person is appointed and onboarded in the organization. Now you can see that that technology solution is causing you to change all your operating procedures. Your standard operating procedures is going to change. The way your people work is going to change. The number of people that you need to do a job is going to be less. An example in the new business area, we used to have a team of 18 underwriters. Now we've created artificial intelligence, robotics, that does the job that these 18 underwriters used to do in a matter of 24 hours, they do in 30 seconds. So guess what happens to those 18 people? There's no more work for them. There's retrenchment facing them. And what other processes are going to be next, which will again force more job losses because of the implementation of technology. Is technology a bad thing? Never. It's the future. So we need to then, in organizations, get our people ready to change with time. That is the recipe. As technology starts coming in, People need to reposition themselves. They need to retrain themselves to be relevant in the new world which embraces technology. So yes, there are skills in the workforce that are now becoming obsolete. It's not needed anymore. And those individuals need to be change fit and change ready, because if you are not fit for purpose in the technology environment, you need to retrain yourself, you need to rebrand yourself, you need to do things differently to be relevant and still employable. So that's why technology is not a bad thing per se. It is going to cause a reduction, but it might actually create opportunities on the other hand. Desirable consequences of appropriation of technology. It is proposed that if a person appropriates a technology, it will lead to increases in personal and object-related satisfaction. And here I really want to say, technology is taking over very transactional type work, which means that the more transformational work that is required is actually the skill to prepare for the future. And that is why it is important that young people coming through the schooling system educate themselves sufficiently so that they can operate in this technology environment, but also for them to be agile. As things change, you need to be agile enough to adjust and adapt. Adaptability is the name of the game. Do not get too comfortable in what you are doing at the moment. Think about whether a robot can take over this function. And if yes, how do you need to reposition yourself and your career to still be relevant through being agile? I'm not going to go through each of these, but these just explain desirable consequences of appropriation of technology. Yes, technology is good for control purposes. Yes, social power and status. People's competence would increase. People may look up to them because they are familiar with technology. This may lead to a sense of increased social power and status, and their enhanced ability may result in them being promoted. And here I really want to say, if you are somebody who is open to change, you will adapt. However, if you are closed off and you resist change, you are going to be extremely frustrated in the new world of work, in the fourth industrial revolution. Your ability to change the tires while the plane is in motion is what is going to set you apart and make you survive. Some people are not comfortable with technology, but guess what? Get comfortable, because if not, you're going to be left behind. Self-identity. When a person becomes competent in technology, it becomes part of the person's identity. Security, a person may feel more secure if they become more competent with the features of the technology they use to accomplish work. Extra role, using one's discretion, time productively for the benefit of the organization. Because when technology comes into roles, it generally frees up some capacity within individuals. And then it is about what do you do with that extra capacity to add value? Because a bot is actually now doing that foundational transactional work. And what other value add activities can you take on to make up for that capacity that has now become available? It can lead to job satisfaction, because people who become competent tend to feel satisfied when they use technology and therefore may be more satisfied with work. Your organizational commitment can go up. Your organizational self-esteem are impacted. You become an organizational citizen that is enhanced. Your self-efficacy increases. Your competence increases. So it's not doom and gloom for the technology explosion that is happening in organizations today, but it is the adaptability of the employees and the managers in the system to redefine roles that have not existed before, because there still needs to be oversight. Bots are good at doing what you program them to do, but they can't apply discretionary thinking in the moment when they are confronted with a scenario. It is always a 1+1 world, whereas humans can think it's a 1+1 plus world, because there are many variables at play. So in conclusion, I just want to say that sensation and perception allow people to perceive reality in a unified and unique way. And I hope that you have gained a little further insight in how all of these factors shapes perception, and how it also factors in biases that we may have. And the issue of prejudice and discrimination, I think it's an important one. We have not won the battle in terms of that. And further initiatives by organizations and by individuals themselves, where they put themselves in situations where they can learn from others. Look at the constitution of people that is around your braai fire on a Saturday or Friday night. Who makes up that posse? Who makes up that friend group? Is it people that only come from one particular racial group, as an example? Or is it people across that? Because how else are we going to learn from each other's diverse perspectives and cultures, and what makes each person so unique? So, ladies and gentlemen, that is it from my side. Any comments or questions? How are your organizations dealing with the issue of diversity in your workplace, as an example?
Natalie, I have one question. It's with regards to illusions. I don't think I completely understand it. And I have read through it, but I don't think I understand it completely just yet. If Natalie can just maybe just elaborate just quickly on that, please.
Okay, just give me 1 minute.
No problem.
It always starts getting dark around me. So let's just look at illusions again. When you look at a magic trick and you ask yourself, how did they do that? How did the card suddenly appear in their hand when it was not there before? Or how did it happen that they pulled the exact card that you had up earlier? They didn't even know what card it was. And that happens through an illusion. because you think you are seeing one thing whilst you are actually seeing something else. And it is the quick of hand that they do. They are so quick with their hands that it doesn't even register in your sight what it is that they're doing. And that is how magicians are able to create that illusion. So you perceive images that are not really there, such as, you know, that water example that I said. So you're driving, it's a warm day, the tar gets hot, and if you look in the distance in front of you, it's almost like you're seeing water on the surface of the road. That is an optical illusion. So that's an illusion. There isn't water, but somehow your brain is registering that there's water, and that is what you are perceiving through your senses of sight, that there's water on the road. And sometimes you have to either shake your head or you have to close your eyes and open your eyes again to really try and see what you are seeing because of that illusion effect.
Thank you, Natalie.
Okie dokie. Any other comments, questions? An evaluation form has been attached in the chat. If you would just please complete that also as part of the administration of the program, I would really appreciate that. So ladies, have a fantabulous week. I shall see you again next week, same time.
Thank you, Natalie. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.